and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about David Foster Wallace's final novel, The Pale King. And although this novel was unfinished by the time of his death, it still is very well written, and particularly the introduction, I think, is worth noting. So we're going to read the first page and a half of this novel and talk about it. So let's dive right in. Past the flannel plains and black-top graphs and skylines of canted rust, and past the tobacco-brown river overhung with weeping trees, and coins of sunlight threw them on the watered-down river, to the place beyond the windbreak, where untilled fields simmer shrilly in the AM heat. Shattercane, lamb's quarter, cut grass, sawbriar, nutgrass, jimsonweed, wild mint, dandelion, foxtail, muscadine, spine cabbage, goldenrod, creeping Charlie, butterprint, nightshade, ragweed, wild oat, vetch, butcher grass, invaginate volunteer beans, all heads gently nodding in a morning breeze, like a mother's soft hand on your cheek. So I want to pause there for a second, because if you're familiar with David Foster Wallace, then you know that he writes really long sentences with a very in-depth vocabulary. Sometimes people call them run-on sentences. I guess you could say that, but usually there's an association with a run-on sentence, that word or phrase, that people have that's negative, or sometimes people use it just to describe to describe a sentence that doesn't really make sense and just goes on and on and on. But David Foster Wallace uses this to his advantage. And particularly with this one, he's mixing a lot of imagery in with the beginning of this story, or the beginning of this novel. David Foster Wallace does have amazing prose. He's one of my favorite authors of all time. He's really the first author that got me excited about the idea of writing. The muse of it all. But he's not one that I would generally associate with imagery or beautiful imagery. But I have to say, this opening to The Pale King, I think it's pretty beautiful. Yes, there's a lot of details, and I think sometimes when you're reading there can be image overload, but reading this opening really makes you feel like you're in some sort of dream sequence, almost like a fever dream. All of these images are just coming at you so fast, and you might not even know what all these plants are that he's describing, but it just lays out this scene so nicely. With bringing in the fields and all the different kinds of plants and vegetation, and even if it's one that you don't recognize, I think you can still kind of picture something. The way he strings words together is just so fascinating to me. Invaginate volunteer beans. I mean, who writes like this? But let's move on, because there is some movement. And if you've read this book before, you know that this intro doesn't tie into the story. But it's a really good, I don't know what you want to call it, a prelude or a prologue, or an intro. You could even call it a teaser or a cold open, but whatever it is, it gets you interested in the rest of the book. So let's keep reading. By the way, one more thing. I love this simile here. All heads gently nodding in a morning breeze, like a mother's soft hand on your cheek. It's just such a great way to describe it. You can see it and you can feel it. An arrow of starlings fired from the windbreak's thatch, the glitter of dew that stays where it is and steams all day. A sunflower, 4 more, one bowed, and horses in the distance, standing rigid and still as toys, all nodding, electric sounds of insects at their business, ale-colored sunshine and pale sky, and whorls of Cyrus so high they cast no shadow. insects, all business, all the time. That's another line I just love. Insects, all business, all the time. It just, when you read that, you can picture it. Out of context, I don't think someone would, maybe understand the idea that David Foster Wallace was going for, but I think in the context of all of these different images of nature, I think you can definitely see it, especially tied to the first time he mentions the insects, electric sounds of insects at their business. So right there, you already have like this image. It's there for a second, but then it disappears because we go right to the next sentence, but then we do hit another sentence about the insects and we can picture them again, even more so now. It really puts the image in your head. Insects, all business, all the time. There is one thing that I forgot to circle or underline. So let's just go back for 1 second over to this. Because we are going to talk about that a little later. But let's keep reading. Quartz and chert and schist and chondrite iron scabs and granite. Very old land. Look around you. The horizon trembling, shapeless. We are all of us brothers. I'm going to circle this too because we're going to come back to that later. Some crows come overhead then, 3 or 4, not a murder, on the wing, silent with intent, corn-bound for the pasture's wire, beyond which one horse smells at the other's behind, the lead horse's tail obligingly lifted. Your shoes, Brand, incised in the dew, an alfalfa breeze, sock spurs, dry scratching inside a culvert, rusted wire and tilted posts, more a symbol of restraint than of fence per se. No hunting. The shush of the interstate off past the windbreak. The pasture's crows standing at angles, turning up patties to get at the worms underneath. The shapes of the worms incised in the overturned dung and baked by the sun all day until hardened, there to stay. Tiny, vacant lines in rows and insect curls that do not close because head never quite touches tail. Read these. All right, just going to underline that part here, the last sentence. Read these, and we're going to talk about that. First of all, I do find this intro to be so unique, so fascinating, and it is just a shame that this was David Foster Wallace's final novel. Unfortunately, he took his life, and this wasn't finished. He had about 1,000 pages or more scattered about in his room. And when he was discovered, I believe it was his girlfriend at the time, and then an editor put together these scraps and basically came up with this published edition. And although I love him as a writer, everything I've read from him, I do have to say that when you read the introduction to this novel, it just makes you feel like he had so much more to give and that he had even more potential than we had even seen previous. It's really quite stunning to read this intro. And I think one thing that really draws a person into this introduction is the fact that he plants words like your and you. When you first start to read it, you picture it's almost like a movement, almost like the opening to a movie, and you're moving and you're seeing all of these different angles on nature, certain kinds of nature too. And there's so many words going on in the page. There's so many different actions and images that you might not even notice that he uses the word your or you, but this is technically in second person. And he uses it very, very covertly. Here, you could really miss it, and you don't even realize that he's talking directly to you, the reader, So it's almost subconscious, the way that these images go into your mind and the way that this draws you in. So using your and you there, so let's turn the page. And this part too, I forgot to circle, but your shoe's brand incised. Oh, let me pull it down. Your shoe's brand incised in the dew. And this is so interesting too, because again, he's using second person, but he's doing it in a very unique way. The beginning of this really sets the scene. Again, there's movement, there's images, it's all going on in your head. But at that part, he says, your shoe's brand incised in the dew. So every person who's reading that has a different image come into their mind. And you picture it in the dew. So today, when I was looking at this a little earlier, I was wearing Clark's desert boots. And I don't know, I just pictured the Clark's logo right in the dew. And so no matter what shoe you're wearing, you're going to picture whatever it is. And that part invites you even more to get along or get into this this introduction here. It invites you to be a part of it, really, because now you're seeing something. You're seeing a part of you, something that you're wearing. You are seeing that imprinted in this strange bit of your imagination as you read this introduction. And so that pulls you in even more. And finally, once he has you and he's totally, what's the word? Not haunted, he's totally possessed your mind with his imagery and the way that his words just wrap around you like a whirlwind. He gives you a directive and he says, read these. I also find it kind of funny too that basically what he's saying is that the rest of this book, everything else that follows after this introduction, is supposed to be us reading dead worms in dung. It's just so ridiculous. And that's another thing too. You cannot forget the absurdity of David Foster Wallace. He does have these beautifully tragic moments in some of his stories. And yes, his word choice and the way he strings sentences together it's genius. It's beyond anything else that you see. It's also absurd. And that's something that I really love about it. I do love absurdist fiction. But yeah, so he ends there and gives us a directive. So, I could dive in, I could circle words that I think my high school students wouldn't understand, like culvert and many other words on this page, like, muscadine, I don't think they'd know. Invaginant, they probably wouldn't know. And also just this phrase in general, invaginant volunteer beings. I could go over those, but instead I think that the focus of this video is what I just talked about, with the fact that he's using second person point of view to really pull the reader in to this novel. So I'm very impressed, and I think it's a great way to open up this final book from an amazing writer. But I think that'll do it for this video. So if you watch this, I don't know who's watching this or what. I do want to thank you for watching it. I'm still trying to figure things out on this platform and what kind of videos I want to do, but I think this is kind of my favorite thing because it most closely mimics how I like to talk to students in the classroom about books. So I think that's how we're going to leave it, and I wish you a great day or night, whatever time of day it is that you're watching this. So thank you so much for watching. I appreciate it, and hopefully I'll see you next time.